The Ignornomicon is the book you do not remember learning because it was taught in glances and pauses, in the warm hand on the shoulder that steers you away from a question, in the gentle laugh that turns your seriousness into awkwardness, in the soft warning that a certain topic is not helpful, in the sudden narrowing of eyes when you speak too plainly, in the quiet reward given to those who keep the peace by keeping the truth small. It is a manual of survival for institutions that cannot afford to be honest, and it is a devotional for people who have been trained to experience clarity as cruelty. It does not announce itself as ignorance. It announces itself as love. By Ignornomicon, I mean the compiled spellbook of avoidance, the practical theology of the flinch, the catechism of not looking, that allows a community to keep calling itself righteous while never submitting its righteousness to measurement. It is not a single doctrine, it is a family of moves. It is not simply hypocrisy, because hypocrisy is lazy, and this is not lazy. This is discipline, this is trained, this is inherited technique. It is the art of never standing in the exact place where an audit could touch you. The old God of the gaps was at minimum a claim about explanation. It said, here, at the boundary of knowledge, God. It was wrong often and sometimes sincere, and it had the decency to be falsifiable by progress. The newer God, the one that has crept into the sanctuaries and staff meetings and small groups like a polite fog, is not stationed at the edge of knowledge. He is stationed at the edge of embarrassment. He is not invoked when the universe is mysterious, but when the community is implicated. He is the God of please don't look at me, I know, but if I don't pretend, people will look at me in a nasty way. This is not a metaphysical being. This is a social reflex given a halo. The difference matters because the God of the gaps collapses under better science, while the God of don't look at me collapses only under sustained attention. The first is defeated by discovery. The second is defeated by refusal. Refusal to accept abstraction in place of repair. Refusal to accept mood in place of accountability. Refusal to let virtue words be used as shielding. Refusal to be retrained back into the flinch. Christian avoidance is undefeated, not because Christians are uniquely weak or uniquely malicious, but because Christianity, as an institutionally successful tradition, has had centuries to perfect the relationship between moral language and social control. It has had time to discover which words calm a crowd without changing an incentive. It has had time to learn how to metabolize critique into spirituality. It has had time to turn moral emergency into a prayer request. It has had time to train whole populations to treat the demand for accountability as divisiveness, as if truth were a threat to unity rather than its foundation. The Ignornomicon operates by substitutions. It swaps the concrete for the cosmic, the name for the vague, the ledger for the hymn. It takes an accusation with a subject and a verb and an object and replaces it with a weather report about the human condition. If you say this person did this harmful thing, the book replies, we are all sinners. If you say this institution protected that person, the book replies, we must extend grace. If you say who made the decision, the book replies, it's complicated. If you say what restitution will occur, the book replies, let's focus on healing. If you say, why did nobody stop it? The book replies, don't judge. Each reply contains a trace of truth because the most effective avoidance never lies purely. It uses partial truths as camouflage, like a predator wearing the colors of the forest. Yes, humans are flawed. Yes, grace exists. Yes, healing matters. Yes, judgment can be self-serving. But the book chooses these truths precisely because, in this context, they function as solvents. They dissolve the specific into the general until no one can be held. Translation is the book's favorite sacrament. It takes your plain sentence and translates it into a moral defect. It does not answer the content. It answers your right to ask. You are not wrong. You are bitter. You are not precise. You are obsessive. You are not demanding justice. You are unforgiving. You are not requesting transparency. You are causing division. It changes the topic from what happened to what kind of person you must be to notice what happened. The move is ancient because it works. If the questioner can be made to feel spiritually defective for asking, then the system never needs to confront the question. This is why the Ignornomicon is not merely ignorance. It is governance. It is cost control. It is the outsourcing of institutional accountability onto individual conscience, because individual conscience can be made to punish itself. It is cheaper to teach people to feel guilty for noticing harm than it is to restructure power so that harm cannot be hidden. It is cheaper to preach forgiveness than to pay restitution. It is cheaper to call for unity than to risk the reputational fracture that truth would bring. It is cheaper to spiritualize the complaint than to fix the policy that produced it. Cheaper, and therefore preferred, and therefore sanctified. The book is especially effective because it borrows the aesthetic of holiness. It sounds gentle, it sounds humble, it sounds like concern, it sounds like maturity. And the people who repeat its lines often believe them because the book is not always being wielded cynically. The point is not that every person is consciously lying. The point is that the system has trained the population to produce the same evasions as if by reflex, the way a body produces antibodies. Truth that threatens the institution is treated as an infection, and the community responds automatically. Isolate, reframe, pacify, silence, forget. The mechanism can run on sincere goodwill as fuel. That is part of its durability. If you want to understand why this pattern is so stable, you do not start with theology. You start with incentives. The institution has assets it must protect: reputation, attendance, donor confidence, leadership legitimacy, the moral self-image of its members, the family systems built around it, the social web that makes life bearable. When those assets are threatened by truth, the book offers a deal. You may keep the assets if you will accept a substitute for repair. You may keep belonging if you will swallow your clarity. You may keep your place in the community if you will allow the community to keep its story. And the deal is seductive because the alternative is terrifying. To refuse the deal is to risk exile. To refuse the deal is to risk becoming the problem. To refuse the deal is to risk learning that the place you trusted is not safe, not honest, not worthy of the sacrifices you made. The human mind prefers many kinds of pain to that kind of revelation. The Ignornomicon knows this. It is written in the grammar of self-protection. So the first law of the Ignornomicon is the law of protective vagueness. Never let a moral claim become an actionable claim. Keep it lofty. Keep it broad. Keep it so true in general that it cannot be used in particular. Talk about brokenness, not about decisions. Talk about restoration, not about consequences. Talk about reconciliation, not about power. Talk about moving forward, not about what must be paid backward. This is how a community can speak endlessly about righteousness while keeping righteousness safely theoretical. The second law is the law of virtue as perimeter defense. When threatened, deploy a virtue word that sounds incontestable and aim it at the questioner, not at the accusation, at the person. Unity, humility, forgiveness, love, grace, peace. These words are not false. They are simply being used as riot shields. When a virtue word becomes a shield, it is no longer a virtue in that moment. It is a tool. The Ignornomicon teaches that the best tools are the ones that feel like morality, because morality is the one thing people will obey even against their own interests. And now we reach the hinge the book always tries to avoid, the question it cannot answer without becoming something else. When the community invokes its virtue words, what concrete cost does that invocation demand of the powerful today in the measurable world? And if the answer is none, then what exactly is being protected, and who is being asked to pay for it with their silence? Because the book's magic begins to fail the moment the ledger is placed on the table and the pen is handed not to the wounded, but to the ones who benefited. And the next page is where we watch, in slow motion, how the simplest accusation is transmuted into fog and how to keep it from happening again. Fire at will. Because the simplest accusation is always specific, and specificity is the enemy of systems that survive by ambient righteousness. Specificity has names. Specificity has timestamps. Specificity has a chain of custody. Specificity has emails, policies, meeting notes, decisions made by identifiable people who could be asked plainly why they chose what they chose. Fog cannot survive contact with that kind of detail. And so the Ignornomicon's first reflex is to change the scale of the conversation until the detail evaporates. It does this so smoothly that participants often cannot tell a maneuver occurred. They only feel relief. Relief is the tell. Watch the transmutation. Someone says, "This happened to me." The book replies, "I'm so sorry you're hurting." That response is not wrong, but it is incomplete by design. It places the pain in the body of the speaker rather than the action of the actor. It frames the problem as suffering rather than wrongdoing. Suffering is sad. Wrongdoing is actionable. Sadness demands comfort. Wrongdoing demands consequence. The book prefers comfort because comfort can be offered without surrendering power. Comfort can be given like a donation from above without changing the donor. Comfort can even be used to purchase quiet. Then comes the next sentence, the one that always arrives if the first comfort did its job and the questioner did not stop. The book will say, "Let's be careful. Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not assume motives. Let's be charitable." Each phrase is a virtue in the abstract. In the concrete, when a vulnerable person is naming harm, these phrases function as brakes, and brakes are not neutral. Brakes distribute force. The book's brakes are designed so that the momentum of confrontation is absorbed by the accuser while the accused remains still. If the questioner persists, the book deploys the master move, tone. It says, "I hear what you're saying, but the way you're saying it makes it hard to receive." Translation: if you speak with the emotional signature of someone who has been harmed, we will treat that signature as evidence against your credibility. This is how the book makes the human response to harm into a disqualifying trait. It is an impossible standard disguised as emotional intelligence. The harmed are asked to present their wound as a sterile laboratory sample. Any blood on the table is treated as rudeness. Tone policing is not a social faux pas. It is perimeter enforcement. When a system cannot refute content, it regulates style. It cannot say you are wrong, so it says you are unkind. It cannot argue against the facts, so it argues against the volume. It cannot deny the pattern, so it critiques the presentation. This is not merely annoying. It is a profound moral inversion. The system treats the discomfort of the powerful as the urgent problem and treats the injury of the vulnerable as an unfortunate background condition. If you want to measure whether a community is captured by the Ignornomicon, you do not measure how often it says the word love. You measure what it prioritizes when love becomes costly. Does it prioritize the emotional comfort of those implicated or the material repair owed to those harmed? The book then reassigns roles. It turns the questioner into a shepherding target. Suddenly, you are not a witness bringing testimony. You are a sheep in need of care. Your clarity is reinterpreted as instability. Your insistence is reinterpreted as trauma talking. Your demand for justice is reinterpreted as a heart issue. The institution's response becomes pastoral counseling rather than accountability. This is one of the most elegant thefts in the whole spellbook. It steals your standing as an epistemic agent. It relocates the conflict from the realm of facts into the realm of your spiritual health, which is a realm where the institution has unbounded authority and no external audit. If the issue is your heart, they can keep the conversation forever and never touch the question of what happened. This is why the Ignornomicon loves interiority. It loves to relocate problems into the inner life, because inner life is where surveillance can be total and evidence can be subjective. It will invite you to examine your own motives, your own unforgiveness, your own bitterness, your own pride. It will do this even when the original issue was someone else's behavior. This can look like wisdom. It can also be weaponized into paralysis. The more you are turned inward, the less you can act outward. Self-examination, in the hands of a self-protecting institution, becomes a sedative. And in the background of these moves is the subtle grammar that makes them feel inevitable. Notice the passive voice. Mistakes were made. Boundaries were crossed. Things happened. There was a failure to communicate. Passive voice is how the book removes actors from actions. It creates harm without perpetrators. It creates outcomes without decisions. It creates tragedy without responsibility. The passive voice is a theological technology. It is an exorcism of agency. Where there is no agent, there can be no accountability. Where there is no accountability, there can be no restitution. Where there is no restitution, there can be no cost. Where there is no cost, the powerful stay powerful. The book is consistent. Then comes the phrase that functions like incense, the scent that signals the ritual is beginning. Let's handle this privately. Privacy is not inherently wrong. It is often wise. But in systems captured by the Ignornomicon, private is not about protecting dignity. It is about preventing the formation of a shared record. It is about isolating testimony so that it can be negotiated, softened, or exhausted. It is about ensuring that each harmed person fights alone, without corroboration, without pattern recognition, without the social reinforcement that makes truth survivable. Privacy becomes a moat around the institution's reputation. The harmed are invited inside the moat, one at a time, where the institution can manage them as individuals rather than face them as a pattern. The book also loves false equivalence. It says, there are hurts on both sides. It says, everyone contributed. It says we all could have done things differently. Sometimes that is true in interpersonal conflict, but when the issue is power and harm, both sides is often a lie told politely. It collapses asymmetry. It treats a punch and a bruise as mutual misunderstanding. It treats coercion and protest as equally regrettable conflict. This is not reconciliation. This is flattening. Flattening is a way to make the strong and the weak interchangeable so that responsibility disappears into the group. A related move is the allergy to the word victim. The book prefers everyone is a sinner, everyone is broken, no one is innocent. In cosmic terms, fine. In practical terms, it is a denial of asymmetry that makes accountability possible. If no one is innocent, then no one can testify. If everyone is guilty, then the guilty can hide in the crowd. The phrase "we're all sinners" becomes, functionally, a cloaking device. It is true enough to be beyond dispute and vague enough to be useless for justice. That is why it is repeated so reflexively in moments of scandal. It is the system's emergency fog. Now look at how the book handles evidence. When evidence supports the institution's story, the book calls it wisdom, discernment, fruit, confirmation. When evidence threatens the institution's story, the book calls it gossip, slander, bitterness, misunderstanding, attack. The same data is classified differently depending on who benefits. This is not theology. This is information security. The institution is protecting its narrative perimeter. Narrative is its territory. To lose narrative control is to lose moral authority. To lose moral authority is to lose compliance. The book understands this at a level most participants never articulate. This is where the God of "please don't look at me" becomes visible. He is invoked whenever the conversation is about to become auditable. He appears as "let's not be negative." He appears as "we need to focus on the gospel." He appears as "this is distracting from the mission." Translation: if we look at this long enough, the story we tell about ourselves will change, and we do not want it to change. The God is not demanding worship, he is demanding discretion. He is not asking for prayer, he is asking for plausible deniability. He is not saying "I am holy," he is saying "please don't make me look unholy." And because the system cannot say that out loud, it says something else. People are watching. This is the cleanest confession the Ignornomicon ever makes. People are watching. Yes, that is the point. People should watch. Watching is how reality becomes shared. Watching is how power becomes accountable. Watching is how patterns become undeniable. But the book treats watching as a threat because watching breaks the spell. The spell requires that each person experience doubt alone, that each person experience discomfort as personal, that each person interpret their own alarm as a spiritual failing rather than as a valid signal. Watching turns private alarms into public knowledge. Public knowledge is where the ledger begins. The ledger is what the book fears most. The ledger is specificity. The ledger says, name the harm, name the actor, name the enabling structure, name the decision points, name the benefits accrued, name the costs externalized, name the reparations owed. The ledger refuses to let moral language float. The ledger pins it to the world. This is why the Ignornomicon's language is airy and circular and pastoral and perpetually future-oriented. Air does not like ledgers. Fog does not like ink. So the question that the book tries to keep you from asking, and the question that will open the next page, is this. If the institution is so confident in its righteousness, why does it react to a ledger as if the ledger were an act of violence? And why does it consistently treat the demand for specificity as unloving? Unless what it calls love is actually the rule that the powerful must never be forced to pay in public what they have already charged in private. Because once you see the substitution machinery clearly, You can begin to name each move as it happens, and naming is the beginning of exorcism. Fire at will. Naming is the beginning of exorcism because the Ignornomicon is not powered by logic in the way a syllogism is powered by logic. It is powered by reflex. It is powered by the little wince before the sentence finishes. It is powered by the social micro penalty that lands on the truth teller and the social micro reward that lands on the smoother. If you can name the move, you can interrupt the reflex. If you can interrupt the reflex, you can keep the conversation in the realm of the real long enough for the real to become shared. Shared reality is what a self-guarding system cannot tolerate, because shared reality is the precondition for collective action, and collective action is the precondition for cost. The Ignornomicon, therefore, does not merely teach you what to say, it teaches you what to feel. It installs a watchtower inside the mind so that you do not need external enforcement most of the time. This is the Panopticon chapter, the chapter that turns doctrine into internal surveillance and spiritual practice into self-policing. And it is the reason the book can be self-guarding without requiring constant overt coercion. A prison that relies on guards is expensive. A prison that relies on prisoners to police themselves is efficient. The most efficient enclosure is the one where the boundary is not out there, but in here, where the very impulse to look becomes accompanied by a pang of guilt, where curiosity is paired with dread, where speech is paired with self-rebuke, where the mind learns to flinch before the body moves. Begin with omniscience. The statement God sees everything can be a comfort in a moral universe where truth matters and justice will come. In the Ignornomicon, it becomes a surveillance device. It is used to collapse the private into the public in one direction only. You are transparent to the institution's God, therefore you must be transparent to the institution's authority. Your interior life becomes jurisdictional territory. Thought becomes a moral act. Doubt becomes a moral failure. Imagination becomes a temptation. Intention becomes the real crime. The perimeter expands from behavior to cognition. This is not spirituality as liberation. This is spirituality as totalization. Then add the discipline of confession. Confession, properly understood, can be cleansing, truth spoken, responsibility owned, repair begun. In the Ignornomicon, confession becomes a habit of self-incrimination without a corresponding habit of institutional accountability. The individual confesses. The institution processes. The individual is asked to disclose, repent, submit, and change. The institution is asked to be gracious, which is a posture, not a measurable action. This asymmetry is the key. The practice is framed as mutual humility, but it functions as a one-way mirror. The institution learns your vulnerabilities. You do not learn the institution's decision points. You reveal, they retain. Over time, the community becomes a population of self-reporting subjects trained to narrate their own flaws while the structure remains opaque. Opacity is always power. Transparency is always vulnerability. The Ignornomicon requires transparency from below and grants opacity above. It makes the demand for transparency from leadership feel impertinent, rebellious, or not trusting God. Trust becomes a theological substitute for oversight. Faith becomes a theological substitute for audit. This is the moment where a community stops being a community and becomes a managed population, when the people are told that asking to see the books is a spiritual problem. And now the genius move, internalization. The system does not need to punish you often if it can teach you to punish yourself. That is where scrupulosity, shame, and conviction become instruments. The believer is trained to scan their own mind for impurity, to treat anxiety as evidence of sin, to interpret discomfort as God's disapproval, to distrust their own perception if it conflicts with the community's narrative. The watchtower is not merely God's gaze, it is the community's gaze internalized, so that even alone you feel the perimeter. This is why the Ignornomicon is so hard to leave. You do not merely leave a building, you leave a reflex system that has colonized your interpretations. You leave a language that has trained you to translate your own clarity into pride and your own pain into spiritual weakness. You leave a moral economy in which your alarm signals have been reclassified as temptations. The bars are not outside, they are in the dictionary you use to interpret your own experience. Then comes the neighbor. A self-guarding system must recruit ordinary people to do enforcement under the banner of love. Accountability becomes the sanctified word for surveillance by peers. Concern becomes the sanctified word for monitoring. Speaking the truth in love becomes the sanctified word for policing deviation. The community begins to feel like family, and then uses the obligations of family to demand compliance. It is difficult to say no to a friend's concern without appearing cold. It is difficult to resist a mentor's guidance without appearing arrogant. It is difficult to refuse a pastor's framing without appearing rebellious. The Ignornomicon knows this. It turns social warmth into a net. The net is not always malicious. It is often sincere. But sincerity does not negate function. A net that catches you because it loves you still catches you. The emotional control layer is subtle. The book teaches that certain emotions are holy and certain emotions are suspect. Joy is holy. Gratitude is holy. Peace is holy. Anger is dangerous. Fear is shameful. Disgust is judgmental. Grief is acceptable only if it resolves quickly into trust. The result is not emotional maturity. The result is emotional censorship. The community becomes allergic to the emotions that signal boundary violations. Anger, properly calibrated, is an alarm. Disgust, properly calibrated, is a boundary. Fear, properly calibrated, is a survival signal. A system that trains you to distrust these signals trains you to be governable. And here the God of please don't look at me emerges again. Because what the system most needs is that you not trust your own sight when sight threatens the story. If you see harm and feel anger, the book whispers, be careful. Anger is sin. If you see exploitation and feel disgust, the book whispers, don't be judgmental. If you see hypocrisy and feel fear, the book whispers, trust God. These whispers are not always wrong in general. In the specific, they are often used to disable the alarm system that would lead to action. A population with disabled alarms is easy to manage. It will endure conditions that should not be endured. It will normalize what should be named. Now add the most potent drug, belonging. A self-guarding enclosure does not only punish with shame, it rewards with community. It offers a social fabric, a schedule, a shared language, a sense of being held. Human beings will trade enormous amounts of truth for belonging if the alternative is isolation. The Ignornomicon exploits this fact without needing to name it. It merely sets up the conditions where the truth teller becomes socially expensive. The person who asks for the ledger becomes the person who makes things awkward. Awkwardness becomes a moral stain. The community learns to avoid the ledger not because it has studied power, but because it has learned the social sensation of punishment. This produces a predictable hierarchy of speech. There are things you may say from the pulpit, things you may say in small group, things you may say only one-on-one, and things you must never say at all. The system will insist this is wisdom, discernment, not casting pearls, protecting unity. Sometimes discretion is wise. In the Ignornomicon's regime, discretion becomes censorship by gradient. The truth is not forbidden, it is merely made impractical. You can say it, but you will pay. The payment is not always explicit. It is a subtle cooling of relationships, an unreturned call, a loss of opportunity, a faint reputational smear, 1,000 small frictions until silence seems like peace. This is the real engine of self-guarding. The institution does not need to hunt dissent. It needs only to set the price of dissent high enough that ordinary people enforce the perimeter on themselves. The watchtower in the mind does the rest. And because the watchtower is internal, it is portable. You can leave the building and still feel watched. You can stop believing and still feel guilty. You can reject the doctrine and still flinch at your own thoughts. You can name the harm and still hear in your own head the institution's voice asking whether you are being unloving. This is how the Ignornomicon persists even after faith decays. It is not merely a set of beliefs. It is a conditioning protocol. Which brings us to the most important diagnostic in this chapter, the difference between conscience and compliance. Conscience is the inner faculty that responds to reality, that aligns action with truth and care. Compliance is the inner faculty that responds to authority, that aligns behavior with expectation and safety. The Ignornomicon trains compliance while calling it conscience. It trains the reflex of submission while calling it humility. It trains the reflex of silence while calling it peace. It trains the reflex of self-doubt while calling it conviction. This is why it is so difficult to argue with. It is not merely an argument. It is a moral somatic pattern. So the next page must ask the question that makes the watchtower visible. When you feel that pang of guilt for looking, whose interest does that guilt serve? And when you feel that pressure to handle it privately, whose story is being protected by privacy? And when you feel that fear of causing division, what exactly is being divided by truth, except the image from the reality? Because once you can distinguish conscience from compliance, you can begin to reclaim your own alarm signals as legitimate data and not as sin. And that reclamation is the hinge on which the entire book begins to crack open into daylight. Fire at will,